So let me start with a question for you, Celine. So do you believe it is possible to scientifically prove the Institute's models by measuring changes in epigenetic markers before and after processes?
Here, it's a very good question. And actually, yeah, it would be my aim in the future to be able to do this kind of measure in epigenetic marks. So we need a strong model. So probably PTSD would be the best candidate, because we know some of the genes that we could look at. And yeah, the idea would be first to demonstrate the biographical trauma healing. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that question? Okay. So I've got a question around meditation and how that might interact with protecting yourself from pathogen attacks. So they found Vipassana, and this is from Anup, found Vipassana and other similar healing techniques helpful in raising body awareness and in sending warning signals in a likely encounter with any discomforting experiences like a pathogen attack. So they're wondering how such experiences can be scientifically studied to know more about the connections between body awareness in meditative states and its natural resistance to disruptive elements. I've got a perspective on that.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I do see a problem with meditative practices. People uncover stuff they don't know how to handle. They can be really disruptive. Everything from becoming aware of giant holes in your body to, different pathogen problems.
I think that was part of the written response that I gave. Yep. But this question is actually more around what will we need to do to actually research what the positive or negative impacts of meditative practices might be on protecting or, potentially end up in a spiritual emergency around becoming more aware of these interactions. Are you about to add something, Kirsten?
Well, I'm just thinking about, because I think the person asking this question might experience that meditation helps her be more stable, and that, I think it could be various things that might be happening, but how to study that. We're again back to we need the tools to follow our discoveries here. So yeah. Not sure. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
I think that, first of all, there's a wide range of meditative practices, and I think, certainly what Grant was saying, that when you start to pay attention inside, you can start to notice what's there, which in general is a good thing. And if we think about just, if you will, mindfulness, paying attention to what are the sensations in our bodies and what emotions are there, as opposed to repressing it either with chemicals or, just totally ignoring it. I think in general, that's a good thing. Although sometimes it's a Pandora's box. And I think that's what Grant is saying. And this, like, for people that are particularly sensitive to that, when they kind of open the box and look inside, it's like, oh my God, it's hell. And I think Kate was sort of referring to that end in the days of LSD, kind of a bad trip that people get in touch with what's going on. And it's not pretty. So in general, if just for mindfulness, being aware, I think it's a helpful thing, but certainly can cause problems for sure. And I don't know that that's talked enough by all people that are teaching meditation, or just thinking it's all rainbows and unicorns and light, and not looking at that other side of what can happen. And I think that's a problem.
Okay, thanks.
The thing that really makes it not too bad of a problem is it's relatively rare. If everybody who meditated had a terrible experience, it'd be different, but it's a smaller percentage. The problem with the Institute, of course, is we tend to get the smaller percentage. So when you have a lot of people doing it, we see a lot of casualties, but again, it's a small percentage of the total. As an engineer, I'm way more interested in getting rid of these problems permanently rather than working out some sort of defense to them. So that's why I'm really pushing the psychoimmunology.
But I think the question was something else. It was like, how could we potentially measure what good outcomes was? Is that correct?
I think it's part of it. I think they want to know, how would we measure whether meditative practices could protect us from pathogen attacks, was probably specifically the question. And we're raising that there's some larger implications if you would, it's not just that it could protect, but actually it might be the opposite.
There are states that can protect you, where you're immune, right? Or where you don't interact. And I don't think that meditation is I mean, it could be helpful if maybe stabilizing in periods of times, maybe a little bit something, but I don't know how to measure that.
You know, if you speak specifically of those big bugs we were talking about in my talk, there's a very simple treatment for it. So you can get rid of these things. You can actually destroy that particular pathogen. It'd be worthwhile learning the technique if you were concerned that it was going to be encountered either in psychotherapy or meditation or anything. It took us bloody years to work out a simple solution too, but once we had it, it's really easy.
Okay, so the next question was around, so this came up during Celine's presentation. Can you talk about consciousness of us and our siblings? So the history starting from our grannies. Do we have one consciousness in our grannies when we are divided in our parents?
Yes, let's say our consciousness is starting here, and our consciousness, the personal consciousness, is starting here.
So Celine, it's a bit quiet. Are you able to get the mic closer?
Yeah, is it better?
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay. So in our grandmother, yes, we have like half of our consciousness that is starting in what will become our egg, and on the other side, what will become our sperm. So now, probably Grant has more answers about that and the different consciousness that will be created in our grandmothers, especially the one that will become our siblings. Now I can just say something about the genetic and epigenetic heritage that we get and that we share with our brothers and sisters. We have only half of the materials of our mother and half of the material of our father. It means we also have only half of the epigenetic marks. And this without counting the two erasure, as I told during the talk. So we are not sharing the same epigenetic marks than our brother and sister, but we can share some of them. And about the consciousness, maybe Grant, you want to add something else?
Grant, are you going to elaborate on that question?
What was the last?
Yeah,
Celine, we couldn't make it out what Celine said at the end.
Yeah, about the consciousness of the siblings starting in the grandmother. Maybe you can say something about that.
I'm not sure what the rest of the question is.
What's the question?
So this is the original question is there just one consciousness in grannies? Yeah, so how much are we sharing consciousness with our siblings versus we start from a separate consciousness right from the start, even when we're in our grannies?
I guess you gave the answer there, I guess, more or less.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
So we know the germ cells are created.
We tend to work backwards from the present. So we end up in one particular germ cell that becomes us. I'm not really sure I can say what happens with the other ones. They're there, you can see them around, but we don't interact that much with the other ones.
But as far as we see, they're not the same. They're not replicates of each other.
Yeah, that's
they're
true.
Separate.
Yeah, they're not clones, which
So
is interesting.
In contrast to, I guess, what do you call it? One-egged twins.
One of the things that we actually looked at that's very interesting is how come brothers and sisters aren't identical? And why do they have different issues? And it was really interesting because it turned out that part of it was which ovary or testes do they come from? So you get a left-right difference. For example, all your little spermies in your left testicle is pretty similar. And the ones that are on the right can be really different. So if you multiply out the combinations, you tend to get a certain range just because of that differentiation. And a lot of that turned out to be disease processes. If there was left side or right side difference in the diseases in the person, it showed up in the damage in the consciousness of the egg of the sperm that forms, and then the person who's created. I don't know if that's answering the question, but feel free to jump in.
So Kate, I can see you're answering a question written. Did you want to respond to that question in the panel, or is it better to just do a written response?
Oh, it's just about endogenous DMT, which I have no experience with. And it is interesting that DMT is in our bodies and in so many other animals and plants as well.
Okay. So we've got a question around, have we actually applied for any funding to do scientific testing?
You want to answer that, or shall we?
Well, the short answer is yes. They've never received any, but yes, we have applied for quite a number of research grants. The struggle we have is just about every organization that's offering to give research grants is basically saying you need to be a university academic, either directly or indirectly. That's pretty much what they're saying. So that obviously makes it really hard for our private volunteer research team. We don't quite, not quite considered in the same field. And a lot of the times the selection committee is a bunch of academic peers. So again, the paradigm conflict that has been mentioned both at this symposium as well as last year's probably works against us, I would imagine. But we keep trying.
Yeah. And I think it boils down to, we've got to do some scientific studies of ourselves, some key papers. One of them would be a paper on the formation of the primary cell. And we've got some ideas how to do that. That could be really important to move our stuff more into the mainstream understanding. But it is sad because here we've really got some amazing stuff. And for example, Parkinson's disease, nobody knows even what's causing that. Now, we don't know what's causing it either. We haven't looked at it, but chances are real good we could probably work out a cure in 6 months. And why? Because we've got this whole new technology, and we have these models that say, okay, it's probably caused by blah blah blah. Let's go look. And it's really sad. We just can't get through these buffers about what's acceptable and what isn't.
On that last one, as you know, Grant, we even offered to do the research on Parkinson's for free. We didn't even ask for money, and we still couldn't get through the paradigm conflict.
Yeah, it's really sad. Yeah, I'd like to see Michael J. Fox get well.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even get to him to say, look, we've got some stuff that'll probably solve your problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what I was talking about in my talk, and exactly what Grant and Shayne have said is there are these structures in place that are, I don't know if they're purposely designed, but they basically keep the status quo. And one of the things that I'm going to start trying, and as we're in training, have some naturopaths that have been trained in our methods and in the model, and start to get it out, if you will, in the grassroots of clinicians, and then we will begin to get case studies. It's not a a controlled trial, which takes a lot more to support to get done, but you can certainly publish case studies, and that, I think that's the place we will start. But the biggest problem is the model is so different. And so I know, you know, Kirsten and I went to a big traumatic brain injury conference, and trying to talk to people about this, they're looking at us like, what did you get from Kate, and what are you high on? Right? It just doesn't compute, because the paradigm and the model is so different. So that's a huge issue. So we'll just keep working at it. And I mean, one of our strategies, I think, is just to solve some of those problems that I was talking about, the resistance to doing the psychoimmunology processes. And I think if through the grapevine, we are starting to get, you know, cures, whether it's for type 1 diabetes or Parkinson's or whatever it is we are, and people are starting to talk about it, that's going to get us some notice. So frankly, that's what I think how we're going to get seen as heard, is through patients that we're helping directly, who are going to go to their doctors and it's like, I've heard about this, why aren't you doing this? And I mean, probably cause some controversy and a lot of, messiness, but hey, we're not going away.
What we're doing is real. It turns out it isn't just some more imaginary thing. It's there. You can see it with microscopes, that sort of stuff. So it isn't going to go away.
Yes, well, we're not the first treatment or therapy that's experienced this. And at some stage, chiropractors and acupuncture was in a similar category, right? And eventually, with a lot of evidence, got more accepted. Okay, is there a global treatment in the Institute against these pathogens at this time?
We're all smiling because do we talk about this sort of thing?
Not at this time.
So our model predicts that such a thing could be possible, right?
Yeah.
So in all categories of things, but we don't have any treatments.
Yeah, boss, how much are we allowed to say?
Well, I think
well, I imagine that you might talk about how this is kind of linked to the purpose of the organization.
Why don't you talk about it?
I'm working out what the next question is going to be.
Oh.
You guys are the co-directors of research.
Well, Kirsten, Mary, and I are really hot on this problem, because really we don't want to do one pathogen at a time. We're only just getting to the point where we can do one pathogen at a time, and yet we're already leapfrogging into how can we do them en masse. And it looks like there are some phenomenon we can exploit to do bunches. Is it ready for prime time? No. Have we proved it first principle? I mean, have we proved proof of principle? No. Do we think we can get a proof of principle? Yes. We just have a lot of things on our plate, but it's pretty exciting. Mary, do you want to add?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, I guess, if you will, a proof of principle. So we know of people who are immune to all diseases. So we know the phenomenon exists, and that's one of the things that we do in the Institute is look at phenomenon out there and go, how does the model explain this? And we certainly have a good explanation in our model. Now, I don't think in medicine that there's even any concept that you could be immune to all diseases. And certainly wouldn't fit the model. So in that way, we have proof of principle. The biggest problem that we're having is exactly what I talked at the end of my talk about, is this unconscious resistance to upsetting the status quo. It's deeply, deeply embedded in our psyches in multiple layers, and it's like an archaeological dig. Okay, well, let's clear that pathogen because that's stopping us from moving forward. And then there's another one that comes up. So we, fortunately, in research, I mean, because we're going into uncharted territory, it is dangerous, right? And we're basically putting ourselves at risk, like the doctor I told you about with the ulcer study, where he infected ourselves, and we're not doing it purposely, but it's sort of like landing on landmines, and sometimes it's like they blow up in our face, and the way that usually happens, not so much in physical disease, but in emotional distress. And then we have to backtrack and stop and, okay, what's causing that, and find the solution for that, and then get stable again and moving forward. So that can cause problems. But as I just hinted at, one of the another big problem in our paradigm, in our model, or how we're exploring that, is that we're not using bench science. We don't have microscopes or electron microscopes or telescopes or anything like that is accepted as this is how you find objective phenomenon. And we are using ourselves and our consciousness and the peak ability to have this, if you will, inner vision and see these things. And yes, we have can get very repeatable results, but our instruments, if you will, ourselves have to be calibrated, and they can be far off. So we can get very delusional and get faulty data. And it's one of the things that makes the research difficult, is sorting out what is faulty data and what is true. And fortunately with grantees, he's our bullshit detector. And it's like, and we're always testing and making sure we're getting real outcomes. But it makes it a little bit slow and difficult. But I think the resistance issue is the biggest problem that we're facing now.
I'd like to.
I think that you can actually look into the world, and people will know this within themselves, that it's like each individual has a ceiling over how good and how well you allow yourself to actually expand into. So it's seen in lots of therapies, I think, or in lots of, when people try to become better, it's like they hit a ceiling. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in the homeostasis of all this that we work with. So it's not just us seeing that. I think it's a known fact.
I'd like to just add two things. One, we use the psychological approach to investigating it because it's cheap. We can do it at home. It doesn't cost anything. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's like any tool. If you have measurement tools, they have areas where they can do things and can't do things. And that's exactly what we're doing. It's just, from my engineering viewpoint, it's just another measurement tool. And if I had $1 billion and a whole research facility, I would never have done it. I would have switched to cool electronic stuff because that's my background. So that's one thing. The other thing is Mary's comment about the risks. For the people who are thinking about self-experimentation, don't. It's just stupid. And you can read about some of the problems in the books we've published. For the people who are panicking because of what Mary said, remember, it's like any drug. Just because you torture a bunch of little animals while you're developing the drug and half of them die or something, by the time you buy it at the counter, it's pretty damn, it's okay. It's good stuff. And that's exactly what we do in the Institute. In the research, we take risks that only an idiot would do. But by the time it gets to the therapists and the clinics and stuff, we've tested the crap out of it to make sure it's safe. So separate those two in your mind. Yeah, one's in the research, one's over the counter. They're very different processes. Mary, do you want to add to that?
No, that's exactly why we do the research. And I think he just called me an idiot. I think he called us idiots, Kirsten. But no, it is why we do the safety testing and pay attention. But and as Kate said too, in all sorts of things, there are these. I mean, we just have traumas that get triggered, and it can cause a lot of problems, whether you're using a technique or not. Right? It's just a factor of the human condition because of all the issues that we're talking about.
Okay, we'll move on to a different topic. So Kate, I'm wondering whether you might want to start answering this question and then the first part of the question, and then someone in the Institute can answer the second part. So Adam's asking, what are shamans doing in ceremonies? And then the second part is, are the spirits they work with actually parts of the primary cell?
Yeah. That's a really good question that I hope somebody will explore. Of course, shamans, they come from different cultures. Some people call themselves shamans who do totally different things than other shamans. I'm not really in a position to say, well, this is what shamans do, much less answer the second question. I think those are fascinating questions. Yeah, what do shamans do? They have their own explanations in their own cultural terms. Some of it does have to do with, like entities and intrusions and, sucking things out or singing the appropriate songs that harmonize the spirits. There can be so many things that happened. And these are people who've studied through the lineage and through years of growing up, and they can't really say if they wanted to say, and they pretty much don't, just want to explain what they're doing for somebody outside the culture. But very, very interesting. I mean, people do get results. So I'm thinking Dr. Joe Tafur, Tafur, he's an MD. He's from Arizona, his family's from Colombia, and he's run a ayahuasca center down in South America. He's a good friend. That would be a question. I don't know that he'd have an answer, but he might have some interesting thoughts on that. So I think when I see him, he's the one person I'm thinking of to ask.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. And who in the Institute wants to ask the second part of the question around, are the spirits that the shamans work with actually parts of the primary cell?
You want me to?
I think you can start, Grant.
Okay. It's a tough one to answer. There's a lot of stuff going on. As Kate's just said, there's no university of shamanism. The stuff is not consistent. And then there's the mail order shamans that is much more popular nowadays because it's a money-making thing for a lot of people. But if you're looking at the real traditional stuff, there's one data point I have that's fascinating. And I learned this years and years ago with people who are looking for power animals. Well, I think the power animal is a misnomer, but some animal helper. And this particular teacher said, oh yeah, you can go for, nice furry animals or this animal or that bird or that, but don't go for bugs. And at the time I went, well, this is years ago. And I went, why not? If you can do a hawk, why not an ant? Well, now that we know about the prions, I'm thinking, good advice. Do not focus on bugs. This is a bad idea. And but it's traditional knowledge. They just work this out through trial and error. They have no idea why. But going back to the original concepts, there is something called species minds. And so humans have one. There's a male and female, and pretty much all animals have them. And it's possible that they're interacting with species minds. I don't really know. The traditions that I actually know about don't use that kind of approach. It's more, they're more focused on developing the person without outside assistance, which resonated more with me. So.
Okay, well, let's ask some questions that have to do with applications. So Barbara was asking around, has there been any research around reversing aging?
You should go on that.
I don't want to keep talking.
No.
Well, I want to sign up for it. Hey, until recently, I didn't worry about it. And then one day I look in the mirror and I see, God, I'm wrinkly and I get this thing under my chin. What the hell? And in my talk, I actually mentioned that all of a sudden it felt like I got male menopause. That was 2014. And it turned out that there's a common species-wide pathogen that does cause aging and screws up metabolism. And that's high on my priority list. Somehow it just keeps getting bumped. But as I get older, I'm getting more and more excited to work on that problem. Mary, you're smiling. Do you have comments on that?
No, I think it's like the main issue I'll keep coming back to is this resistant with healing. So I think for me, what we found with psychoimmunology, and as Shayne pointed out, what we were learning was just instead of years or even decades to make a breakthrough, I mean, I think he said now it's months. And I think in research, it feels like, yeah, we did that 2 days ago. What was it? It seems like a month. So it's really escalating exponentially what we're learning and what we're finding. And until we crack that fundamental problem about this resistance, it's going to continue to be a logjam in implementing these things. But we're making a list, and as Grant said, aging is certainly on there. And I think once we make those fundamental breakthroughs as far as not being resistant to healing what's necessary to heal at the most fundamental level, that some really exciting things can happen. Like I said, it's a very disruptive technology what we're working with. Yeah.
Well, on those, particularly the last 6 months or so, some of the things you've been working on, a simple question that I think you now would have a more accurate response to. So roughly, what's the percentage of traumas that are generational versus biographical?
Shit.
Oh, I can't count that high.
80 to 20? Or even higher on the generational. Generationals really run how we are built, how we function. But biographicals definitely screw up people's here and now experience of life, I think. I mean, generationals do that too, but that was just a quick, like, I don't know, what do you think?
Boy.
Yeah, I was doing what Mary just is doing.
Counting.
But,
80, 20 most. But if you said, can I only heal biographical or generationals? I'd say I want to kill generationals.
Oh, definitely.
The impact is just, and all of these, with the psychobiology and the pathogens, that's all generational trauma. Yeah. And so the impact is just huge.
Huge.
Yeah, generationals feel so personal. I mean, biographicals, they're very painful, but you're not as attached to that they are who you are.
So kind of following on that question, and Mary almost touched on it, is there a global treatment in the Institute that gets rid of all generational traumas?
Not yet.
I was going to say theoretically.
Yeah.
But yeah,
in the early days, we actually discovered a way to get rid of traumas en masse, but we found a really interesting problem. As we started to do this, the people started to resist and freak out. It turned out what we were doing was we were disturbing homeostasis. As long as we were only doing one here, one there, people didn't seem to care. But you start to do them en masse, it really caused problems. Homeostasis just got freaked out. So we abandoned that approach because we realized, yes, as attractive as it looks, it's causing problems. We didn't know why homeostasis was screwed up, but we knew that there was something really fighting this. And I think just in the last couple of...
Yeah, I think we're closest to finding what that
I think we figured it out in the last couple of months. And at that point, we can start to do things en masse. But up to now, up to recently, we just weren't willing because we knew it was causing problems.
Okay, another fundamental research question around from the early days. So from a peak states perspective, we talk about the importance of key developmental moments. So how do we know that there is a developmental moment where past trauma is not supposed to be there? How did you discover that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I do want to mention one thing. Everyone in this talk actually has done research. So I guess we're all idiots. Kate Sorensen, she was one of the earliest research people, Kate Hawke, was one of the earliest researchers in this area. So she used to jump on the landmines on a regular basis. So she's speaking from experience too here, not just, yeah.
Well, and I recall being pretty unsettled when we would go in there and deal with something really deep, and like something would happen, and I was like, oh, that's supposed to be a good thing, and now I'm just like disoriented.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I didn't feel like there was any lasting damage, but there was also a feeling of maybe some landmines.
Yeah. We just didn't have a good model back then. We were just basically putting hands over our face and starting to stomp on the ground to see what exploded. Yeah. Back to the question.
Yeah, so how did you make your breakthrough that you published in Peak States of Consciousness Volume 1, that peak states are due to key developmental events not having trauma?
Trial and error mostly.
Intuition.
Yeah, and intuition. We were just lots and lots of cases, lots and lots of people looking at lots and lots of events. It started to, most trauma people come in with was just random trauma, had nothing to do with peak states. So to actually figure out that states corresponded to key developmental events was a huge breakthrough. And again, it was measurement mixed with hypothesis and going back and forth. Once we had the hypothesis, then we turned it around. We said, well, if this is true, I'm going to start fooling around with this key developmental event. We heal the crap out of it, and then we get a state. And we went, oh, well, this theory looks like it's probably working, and then we'd pick another one. And we accumulated a ton of states back in the early days doing this. So that approach that model turned out to be a valid model. There's nuances though, because it turned out that sometimes multiple developmental events were involved with a particular state. So you could do one, and in one person, boom, you get a state, and another person you wouldn't. It's because that person you did get a state in already had everything fixed up. And so there was a lot of experimentation going on, figuring out how these things sequenced down the developmental path. But the model itself turned out to be key and correct. And it also explained why some organizations were saying you heal lots of trauma and you get better and better. And we weren't seeing that. And it's because you could heal a shitload of trauma that's not relevant to developmental events, and it would make them feel better, but it wouldn't do anything dramatic. And it was really there were some that really mattered. And it's the same with psychoimmunology. Some of them really mattered. 99.9% make no difference. And unless you have a good model, you'd never be able to figure out which ones are the right ones.
And Grant, you want to talk a little bit around this link between measurement models and conflicting paradigms, around how the journey started because data that you were seeing didn't match the current paradigm, or your own personal experience didn't match that paradigm around peak states?
Well, I think my wife, Kirsten, I'm in trouble, said it really well.
I was going to say, you can see why the aging project is getting more and more important to us.
I think he has had a name problem all his life, though.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah. Sorry, I got so derailed now. What was I talking about?
So Shayne, is there a particular thing you're thinking about that he should elaborate on?
Yeah. So what was the current paradigm around peak states at the time, that you had to lead a virtuous life or follow spiritual practices? Now, how did that conflict with what your personal experience was around peak states?
Actually, I could put it in a different way. And Kate, you want to jump in with this. The model when we started was there was no such thing as a peak state. Now, it's hard for most of us in this group to realize that, but in the early days, there was only peak experiences, and they were temporary. And that was pretty much the dominant model. The reason I was looking at peak states is because I'd had one that was lifelong. And so I knew this sucker wasn't an experience. I was born with it, and I was going to school with it, and I was arguing with my wife with it, and all that sort of stuff. So I knew for a fact that there were states, but nobody else that I talked to actually had any conception that that was possible or true. Even though if you looked out in the world, you could see examples of people with states, but the people's thinking was that it was all experiences. Kate, do you want to add to that?
Well, I'm just thinking it depends on definitions. And yeah, there are states. There have been, peak experiences that really came and went quickly. And then there have been other times where something opened up and lasted not forever, but, for some weeks. But then thinking about, well, let's see, what states have we had all of our life that we don't even think about because it's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can see people like that, but they don't think it's unusual for the reason that Kate just said.
Yeah. Well, I used to think everybody was pretty much like me, and then
exactly that's
realize now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had Beauty Way, and I just assumed everyone didn't have trauma, didn't have negative emotions, even though I could see that it wasn't happening, that people had all these issues. It just wasn't part of my worldview. Why don't you just let that feeling go? Was my often response that I'm sure drove people absolutely mad. Yeah.
I've got a quick question from Adam around any tools to strengthen the Gaia connection for healing.
Well, I would say we have this tool, and tap on your resistance to being connected to Gaia is certainly, one thing that you could try.
We've never come up with a good solution to that problem. I wrote in volume 2, one of my colleagues, 1 or 2, I can't remember, I think it was maybe volume 1, one of my colleagues got triggered into the beginning of the birth process. And when she healed that, she was able to hear Gaia afterwards. How was that possible? We've never figured out how that goes. I think one of the problems is that Gaia is constantly directing our health and well-being and what we're supposed to do. And people don't want to obey. And so you're working uphill here. You want to hear Gaia, but you don't want to do what Gaia tells you. So there's a real conflict here. It was actually shocking to me when I started paying attention that everybody's getting the same kind of message. How you phrase it is the difference, but it's basically work on the humanity project. And everybody was ignoring it. And that one's the dominant message. So if you're ignoring the dominant message, how do you speak to Gaia? I think, but again, it'd be great to have a technique that worked more reliably. I don't know where in development that would come in. We've explored all over the place looking for it, but without success.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I would. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say Grant's showing his bias because I think the question could be asked in 2 ways, right? One is, how do you permanently increase or get Gaia connection? And naturally, Grant has responded to that question because that's what he's always trying to get is a permanent solution, right? But I guess one of the temporary things that we teach our therapists is things like Gay Hendricks has got a technique called loving yourself, which temporarily gets you into a better state to improve healing abilities. Jacqueline Aldana has a 15-minute miracle that helps you get into more of a gratitude state, which can improve your. So there's some temporary things you can do, but Grant's response is to the more interesting question is how do you get to that state permanently, right?
Yeah.
So I think anything that can increase your ability to love yourself will increase that, because that's the connection that I think is missing in the world. Why we're so divided, as you can see now.
But I'd have to say Jacqueline Aldana's 15-minute miracle process is probably focused on Gaia better than anything I know. Yeah. Yeah. And Kate's comment, how do we make these stable? I think, yeah, turn it into states is what we were working on in the institutes for so many years.
So there were lots of questions around bugs. So let me pick one. So this is the fact that you were alternating between calling them bugs versus calling them prions or prions. So prions from a biological point of view are proteins, not even a cell, but bugs as we know them have their own consciousness or some type of it. They can move, sense, feel, interact, and so on. How is it possible that these two things are the same? How proteins can have consciousness, can move, feel, act, and so on?
Well, they're not the same. And if you watched my talk, I had that little picture of the poo on the grass yard, and the owner of the property going, where the hell is this poo coming from? Well, that's kind of what I think prions turned out to be. It's the residue or the byproduct of the bugs themselves, and it just piles up. And the hypothesis was that somehow the poo was reproducing itself without realizing that over in the corner there's a cat shitting in your yard at night. So I think and biologists are coming around to the view that the current prion hypothesis is just wrong. They can't prove it. They can't make the proteins reproduce, and they can't figure out how the proteins could have caused the damage in the first place. But the I don't know, the stampede to thinking that the prions hypothesis was proved was very, very seductive to a lot of people. It's uncertainty and unknowing are really hard on people, and it just turned out that approach didn't solve the problem. And I'm not saying that our bugs are prions, but it sure matches the data profile. And it to have yet a fifth completely different problem seems pretty unlikely. Also, we see the bugs making this glycoproteins, and that's exactly what people are calling prions. So, you know, in that picture of the poo, think the bugs are the cats, and the poo is just a byproduct from the cat.
I think maybe what we can start to do in the institute, because we generally don't talk about bugs, and when we talk about them, we talk about prions. But as you're saying, if we start to call them prion-associated pathogens, PAPs, that may help us shift the thinking that the actual protein that's the prion or the prion that they're seeing is, as you said, kind of a byproduct and just associated with it, as opposed to the actual structure that we're calling bugs. We'll have to discuss this.
Well, I like the word prion for the bugs because bugs creeps us all out. To think that there's bugs crawling around inside of your cells, ugh. So it gives it a more neutral label. Also, it explains the different proteins that they're seeing with these prionoids, because the different bug species give off different glycoproteins, and that's exactly what we're seeing in biology.
So another bug question. So since we have bugs from very, very early time and also pick them up from our environment, are we both able to immunize ourselves from both types once healed, so that even the ones picked up, say, from volcanic ash, don't stick again?
Well, with our new technology, the answer is yes. There's no cure for prions in regular medicine.
We've got some peak state questions. Do you believe that there could be lab markers for peak states, maybe like ATP or something else?
Actually, oh, can I answer that one, guys?
So pathways, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is probably yes. Peak states correspond to optimum metabolic pathways. So you could probably measure the pathway chemicals in some way or other and say, yeah, this person has XYZ, which in a normal person doesn't appear, but these people with peak states do have it. So boom. Mary? Kirsten?
Well, I'm just thinking it might be interesting to look at what HeartMath is doing with heart rate variability. And again, certain heart rate variability patterns are much more functional as opposed to dysfunctional. And whether, I don't think it would be like a single marker, but it would be an interesting thing to correlate.
It would probably
certain
be
peak states.
It would be different from peak state to peak state,
Hmm.
because each one would be tapping into a certain part of our biology that works optimally.
Hmm.
So say that you have a state with a really deep sense of peace in that, you could probably measure that the brainwave are in sync with your heart something. Because that gives you,
or a chemical component.
Something.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that there would be indicators of this.
Yeah, so once we have large groups of people in any one peak state of consciousness, we can then start to, I think, track some of these markers, as Kirsten is saying, doing EEGs and looking at EEG patterns, EKGs and looking at the heart rate variability, certain biological or chemical markers, and see what the patterns are. I certainly think it's possible. It would also, oh, Celine is gone yet, but whether there would be some markers having to do with epigenetics as well would be interesting.
Okay, got some tactical questions around. So Grant, you were recommending reading volume 2, but as you put up, that was written 14 years ago, and we're talking about how quickly we're making discoveries. So Adam was asking, is volume 2 still up to date 14 years later? There are no corrections for it on the website.
It's not, but surprisingly, it's really held up. The real, and we found this out when we were doing the translation for Polish. The big problem is that we didn't realize that a lot of the stuff we were seeing in the development sequence were actually life cycles of funguses or bacteria. We were confusing them with our own. So that data part, those chapters, is misleading. But aside from that, most of it's pretty good still. Kirsten,
so the Polish version actually includes that in the new foreword that says that that is the conclusion from the years past the first edition, and maybe should be updated as the minimum.
Yeah.
in the current one.
Yeah. After I'm done with the current 6 books, 6 new ones. Yeah. Mary, it's your turn to write a book. How about your turn to get obsolete? You haven't done one since 2004.
You're like calling me out in public here. This is back channel chatter while Shayne searches for questions to ask.
Gilly's a presenter for Sunday. Did you want to throw in your 2 cents on anything? We've kind of talked around you.
That's what I was doing in the background as well.
Somebody asked about Sadhguru, I was reading something about Sadhguru and saying that he was talking about some kind of peak state in one of his books. I like asking people about peak states, so I asked a lot of people at the ashram last year when I was there for about 6 weeks, and got lots of ticks for lots of the peak states. So that was just from the yoga practices that they recommend there. So I think Sadhguru's stuff is very powerful, and it does lead to a lot of the really nice states that you talk about in your books and you have on the website.
Could you say SAD? SAD? Is that? I don't recognize it.
It's a
Sadhguru.
Type of
it's the yoga.
Ah.
He's a guru. He's a very famous guru in India, and he has some very powerful yoga practices that do move people into peak states. I think one of the main ones just gives you underlying happiness in 90 days. So that's kind of nice. People have gold inside and hollow state and lots of things like that. So it's kind of common, but again, as you know, when you ask people these things, they kind of go, oh yeah, I do, you know, but it's their normal, so they don't recognize that there's anything special going on.
Billy, are these stable? And once they get it, is it stable, or do they keep needing to do the practice to sort of maintain it?
What he says is, if you do his core practice, which is called inner engineering, if you do that for 90 days, you'll be happy. That's what he said. And it works.
And then you can stop doing it.
Then you can stop doing it. I think it'll probably drift out if you stop doing it. The idea is you carry on doing the practice every day for the rest of your life. But the higher and more advanced practices that he offers tend to be the ones that take you into hollow and wholeness and things like that. But yeah, very powerful stuff. And you know, I discussed it in my talk last year when I was talking about the ways to get peak states.
Yeah, and this is an interesting intersection of a different tradition and coming up with the same words that how we describe some of the peak states, as you said, the hollow and the golden and some of those things.
Oh, they don't use those terms.
Oh, oh.
No, I just go. So, because I always ask people, where are you in your body? Because embodiment's my big thing. And this lady said to me, she said, you know, since I did the teacher training, I just feel hollow inside. And I'm like, oh, you've got hollow. Fantastic. And yeah, and there's this kind of burning sensation on my skin. And I'm going, yeah. And it's like, oh, you've heard of this, because nobody at the ashram has nomenclature for any of these things. And basically you're told, don't pay any attention to what's going on, just keep doing the practices. And it's very difficult, because people do have questions. They kind of go, why is this happening to me? Is this normal? And so I keep telling them, yes, it's normal. Very, very good. Keep doing it.
That can be very reassuring.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's shocking that they don't have that awareness, because some people can be really confused and bewildered to have these states all of a sudden.
But see how uniform it is, the description, right, of what Grant has described in his table. Shayne, I was thinking Barbara Connor had this, that if
that was the aging one.
No, she has one. Oh, sorry, that was the aging one. One about the primary cell, and if what is out of body then. Here it is. That was Lisa Gorlin. If the consciousness resides in the primary cell, what happens when consciousness leaves the body as an OBE, out of body experience? So I thought that was a pretty interesting question, that because actually in the primary cell, you have the ability with your consciousness to go anywhere in the body, and that includes outside your body, because there is part of the primary cell that actually is experienced as outside your body. I don't know if you want to comment it as differently, but and with that, your awareness is able to look back on yourself and everything there. You want to say anything else?
I actually don't know the mechanism.
No, we don't, but we know that
it exists.
We know that when you move around in the primary cell, that you are in different parts of your body depending on where you go. And so my experience, but maybe it's not substantial, that we have evidence for it, that leaving the body would be leaving what is consistent with that experience inside yourself.
Don't know. Yeah, it's one of those unknowns we just haven't explored.
So we've been going about an hour, so I was going to just do maybe one or two last questions before, and whether anyone wants to say any final words. So just one more bug question for you, Grant. So you touched on gaining weight was somehow connected to bugs. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. I think it's particularly interesting because I had no weight issues. My weight stayed within a pound pretty much my whole life. kind of annoying, especially when I wanted to bulk up with muscle. But when I got this volcano bug, suddenly my hormones, what's that system? Metabolism went wonky. All of a sudden, I started gaining weight or losing weight. And like I said, I lost sex drive. I also I could see aging processes happening. And what I think is this particular pathogen screws up a lot of different systems, and whatever you're the most vulnerable in is what shows up in your body. I don't think I was infected till then. But once I knew what to look for, I started looking for people who had weight issues, and I found that particular pathogen all over the place in them. So there's a good chance that we're looking at kind of a systemic in the population prion that's messing up metabolism in a lot of people, but in different ways. So it depends on you how the pathogens from the prion would mess up your body. The only way to prove that is to get rid of it, which is on the list, and see if I get skinny and young again, or younger. At that point, I'll go, yes. But we won't know till we actually get to doing it. We actually started to work on that and with one of our colleagues who actually had a weight issue since he was born. And as we started to work on it, he freaked out. He got real upset about getting rid of that particular pathogen. So we've got to do some more research and development work. It is not ready for prime time. Yeah.
And we're back to resistance.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a way through these resistance. It's just, we've got to figure out an easy way to do it.
Yeah, and just so people know, we definitely have made progress in research, but it's just a little bit more, and it's like, and one more thing. I mean, it's got to be a finite number of things to solve, but we're working through them one by one.
Well, what's exciting is that we've really made it simple how to get rid of these diseases. I mean, it can't get simpler. Now we're just working out, now that people know we can do this, now they're freaking out. But until this last couple of years, we just didn't know how to do it. Now, it can't get simpler. So, Mary, you're nodding, or Kirsten, yeah? Want to say?
Yes, it's one of those things that is super, super simple, but that don't mean it's easy. It's kind of like I tell people, okay, you know how to walk. You can walk on a sidewalk. Simple, right? You know, assuming you don't have paraplegia or something. But put that sidewalk across the Grand Canyon without any railings. Who's going to walk across that? That is not easy, even though you're doing the exact same simple, just walking on a sidewalk. So that's how I think about it. There's a lot of resistance to walking across that sidewalk across the Grand Canyon because you feel like you're going to die. And that's kind of like what this resistance is.
Well, we'll work it out.
So I'm going to very quickly answer two questions, and then we will start to wrap it up. So Lisa was asking, have there been any recent ISPS developments in eliminating allergy? She's tried the TAP method, but there's something deeper that she needs to heal. So if you've read Subcellular Psychobiology, the 4 things that we recommend for allergies, the first one is body associations, which I believe she's also tried, generational traumas, biographical traumas, and a subcellular case that we call copies. So that's what we would recommend for allergies. I wouldn't say that they're recent, so we've been teaching that for quite some time. But that's what we teach as far as the trauma techniques that are contributing to allergies, and we get really good results with that. Every time I do that as a demonstration in the trainings, every single time their allergy or food sensitivity disappears. And then there is a question around last conference. We talked about our S-hole process, and the current process is effective, but it's not as stable as we'd like to be, and we're working on improving that. So my first presentation tomorrow is going to be talking about, in general, how trauma therapy is going to be significantly improved from an effectiveness and efficiency perspective, one of which S-holes I'll talk about. And also Jolanta Hamelink is specifically talking about S-holes and the the research we've been doing on the new psychoimmunology technique under her topic around the neediness syndrome. So that's probably all we've got time for questions. Does anyone want to say any final words before we wrap up the panel discussion?
I just want to say my doctor warning whenever people are talking about allergies. So even though Shayne talked about 4 things that we've been teaching for a long time to try with allergies, if you have an allergy that causes anaphylaxis, like shellfish or bee stings or something, and you're saying, oh, can I use this to clear it? It's not don't try it, but don't test it without medical support. Okay, just don't. Again, a Darwinian sort of award thing to do.
Absolutely.
And if you do get rid of a bee allergy that causes anaphylaxis with those techniques, please let us know. And have your doctor that monitored you while doing it give us a call. We can write it up.
Anyone else got any final words they want to say before we finish the panel discussion?
I just want to say thank you. And it's been fun.
Okay.
And I want to thank Kate for showing up at the last minute. Kate, thank you so much. It's so great to see you again in this venue. Yeah. Do you have anything that you'd like to say based on your talk or what you've heard tonight?
No words of wisdom for you all, but thank you for including me, and definitely got some things I want to follow up on because of this. So thank you for giving me this chance to jump in.
Yes, thank you, Kate, and thank you to all the presenters from today, and thank you to all the attendees watching us both live here on Zoom as well as our live streaming to Facebook. So we have a full agenda tomorrow as well, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, everyone.
Jilly, do you want to say anything to end up? I want to make sure everybody had a chance. Jilly?
No, I'm done.
Okay.
More tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.